This meeting is being live streamed on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And we're also going to be recording the meeting. So if you want to appear in the meeting, that's great. And if you don't want to, you can just leave your camera off. We've got 4 panelists, and I'll be introducing each one of them one by one, and each of them will give introductory comments. And then we'll be opening the floor to questions. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can ask it in the chat, or if you're watching on live stream, you can ask it in the message, and we'll try to keep track and get through as many of those questions as we can during the meeting. So I'll start with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, and that the land that we are on is covered by Treaty 13, the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And as we go through this meeting, I think it's really important to think about the Indigenous stewardship of this land and try to bring that type of stewardship mentality to the work that we are doing tonight and the conversation that we're having, because there's a crisis in our community and we need to address it. And we need to think about this as stewards, not only of the land, but of the community that occupies this land now, for those of us who are settlers and those who are here as First Nations people. So thank you very much for joining us. I want to say from the outset that I got a couple questions about this meeting, and I want to make sure that I'm very clear that homelessness is caused by an inability to pay for housing. The incomes are too low, housing is too expensive, and this is what causes homelessness. And that's the focus. And if we want to solve the homelessness crisis, first and foremost, we need to provide affordable housing. And it needs to be, not what the government sometimes describes as affordable housing, which can be, a $600,000 condo. It needs to be rent geared to income housing so that everybody has a place to live. And it's absolutely a basic human right that everybody have a place to live. There is a complication here too, and there's a connection with addictions, and this is what we're going to be talking about today too. So the addictions feed into homelessness and vice versa, and the addictions and the drug use and drug trade also feed into gun violence, and we're going to be discussing all of those topics. So some people have addictions, and the addictions cause them to lose their jobs and lose their income and ultimately to become homeless. Some people end up being homeless for other reasons. And then, with the stress of the streets, they start to self-medicate and then develop an addiction. And so there is a connection between homelessness and addiction. And we're going to be talking about that. We've got some excellent panelists tonight with firsthand experience about this to talk about it. And the issue with gun violence, we've got Marcel Wilson from the One by One movement. He's going to be talking about what's been happening, what the fentanyl in particular has done to gangs and guns in the city. So we're very fortunate to have this group. I came into this personally. I've been deeply concerned about all of these issues for a long time. I started a gun violence work group 10 years ago when I started getting invited to the funerals of young men who were getting killed in gun violence. At the beginning of the pandemic, a friend and I, Shauna Harris, who's on the call, started a food program for people, initially for seniors and people in supportive housing, but ultimately for people experiencing homelessness. And we've been doing that for a year and a half now. And I've come to know and meet many people who have experienced homelessness, and some of the panelists here. And so the purpose of this meeting is really to get a deeper understanding of what is happening with addictions and with fentanyl in particular, and how that is such a game changer in addictions in the city, and particularly how it's impacting people who are experiencing homelessness, and also how it's feeding into the gun violence. So our first panelist tonight is Dr. Leslie Buckley. She's the chief of the addictions division at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, better known as CAMH in Toronto. Dr. Buckley is an addiction psychiatrist specializing in providing outpatient treatment for substance use disorders, and assistant professor at the University of Toronto. She has a special interest in health system innovation in addiction treatment and creating collaborations to enhance care for people seeking help with substance abuse. Dr. Buckley, thank you so much for being here. And can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do, but in particular in relation to how that work has changed with the advent or the popularity of fentanyl?
Well, I think, well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me here. And I want to thank, the panelists for coming, shining a light on the opioid poisoning crisis, and everyone who's in attendance here, because, it is a huge challenge and is new and a game changer, as you said, Chris. And I think we need to think about solutions, and we need everybody's thoughts and opinions. So it's great to have this kind of an event. Your question is about what's different about fentanyl, and many people here may be aware or know somebody who is struggling with fentanyl, and to see it up close, you know how this is a challenge. This is a substance that's different than other substances, and this isn't your parents' substance. This is a new level of power in terms of how it impacts somebody, from the harms that it causes and the disruption in someone's life. And then maybe, somewhere that I guess when I'm thinking about the CAMH perspective, we're thinking a lot about how it makes it really a lot harder for somebody to seek treatment. And maybe the old treatment models that we've had to work with substances from the past isn't really going to work the same way with fentanyl. And, with fentanyl, the withdrawal is so powerful that, somebody comes into an emergency room. This is sort of a classic story, may have a different issue as well, fentanyl, but also maybe suicidal or struggling in some other way, or have a physical ailment, and, they're waiting, and the withdrawal is so bad and it's so hard to be there, they might leave. And, we're just not equipped necessarily as a system to be reacting quickly enough to be able to provide that person with comfort and support. But we're working on it, and we get it. And, we know that we have to do things differently, and we're sort of activating and trying to get special addiction teams in each hospital. And, there is hope. So we are definitely learning, month to month, new ways of new protocols of trying to get people feeling more comfortable more quickly.
Okay, Leslie, I'm thinking some of the people on the call may not know what fentanyl is. Can you give us like a one sentence, two sentence definition of what is fentanyl?
Sure. So, when you think about different substances, we know what alcohol, is. It's a depressant. We know what cannabis does. Stimulants like crystal meth or cocaine, they create sort of a increased activity in the brain. Opioids are slightly different. They're their own class. So opioids would include painkillers, OxyContin, for instance. And fentanyl is really been on the scene since about 2015, 2016, kind of replacing that OxyContin that seemed to leave around that time. And it's just like another level of powerful. So it just creates sort of a more intense high, a more intense withdrawal, and just, has such a grip, when it comes to dependence.
And what I've been told is that a point of fentanyl is how you get a high, and the point is 1/10 of a gram. So it seems like you don't need very much of this.
That's true. It's a small amount. And, that's part of the problem. Is it's really hard to know how much you're getting with fentanyl, and the supply is so tainted and, really truly poisoned. That makes it very challenging to use and dangerous.
Okay. Thank you. And what about I want you to talk a little bit about treatment. So is treatment available? So if somebody has an addiction and they want to go into detox, and then they want to go into rehab, is that available?
So it is available. RAMs are rapid access addiction medicine clinics, and most hospitals have them, and they serve on a walk-in basis. So there's always a RAM open somewhere in the city. So someone can almost always get care. What we want to do is make that, even we want to increase retention, so make it easier for people to stay on the treatments that we provide. We want to make sure that we're providing good harm reduction at the same time, and just work on overcoming hurdles that may be keeping people from coming for treatment, like stigma, for instance, and maybe promoting treatment. I was actually on a radio show and a couple of people called in and talked about their life experience and how treatment completely transformed their lives. And I thought, oh, that's the story we should be sharing, to really let people know that, you know, there can be a big change that comes if you can get on the right treatment.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for being here tonight. We're going to come back to you with some more questions from the audience. But first, we're going to introduce Marcel Wilson. Marcel is the founder and president of the 1 by 1 movement, an organization founded by former gang extremist and organized crime members that research, develop, and programming for youth and adults with a focus on anti-bullying, gang prevention, and exit strategies, and long-term support through mentorship. 1 by 1's primary goal is to operate as a think tank and to decrease extreme acts of violence across the city. So Marcel, thank you so much for being here. What is your experience with the opioid, with the opioid, with the drug trade, and what are you hearing about is happening to gang violence in the city because of fentanyl?
Okay. So first I want to say good evening to everybody, and to follow what the doctor said, thank you to the panelists. Thank you for everyone who's come out to hear about this very serious topic. Thank you for having me to share my thoughts and my professional opinion on this epidemic that is killing and affecting the lives of countless people in Toronto. As Chris said, my name is Marcel Wilson. My qualifications to speak on this topic is rooted in my lived experience as a person who has recovered from opiate addiction myself. And I am a subject matter expert in gang culture and theory. As Chris said, I'm the founder of 1 by 1 movement. I'll elaborate a little bit on it. Yes, we're a think tank, speakers bureau, comprised of what we refer to as former organized crime figures, former gang leaders and members, former extremists, etc. We work directly boots on the ground with at-risk and high-risk people of various backgrounds. This, combined with the lived experience of my amazing team, gives us access to a traditionally difficult demographic to collect meaningful data from. So metaphorically, we have our fingers on the pulse of the streets, directly and indirectly. That being said, I'm here to speak on the correlation of the fentanyl epidemic and how this contributes to the epidemic of gun and gang violence in our city and others. So to help clarify my opinion, I've developed a simple variable equation. And that equation is FDA, so just bear with me here, FDA times MH divided by P plus C minus SR times S plus M equals violence. And what this means is fentanyl / drug abuse times mental health divided by poverty plus crime minus sustainable resources times subjugation plus marginalization equals violence. And to kind of explain this and break it down, I'll kind of just do it in rapid bullet points here, where high-level organized crime groups import the drug and then distribute. And in this case, we're talking about fentanyl. So they distribute to mid-level organized groups and gangs, who then distribute to street-level dealers. Many of the street-level dealers are connected to street gangs. The street-level dealer distributes to the client, the person who's using fentanyl. They also sell to other street-level dealers who are always shopping for a higher quality product and a more addictive product. Mid-level and street-level dealers, gang members, sometimes, like myself, become addicts and sometimes use the drug to cope and suppress or treat trauma and or PTSD that is brought on by their activities and lifestyle. This in many cases can cause the user to act out more aggressively than they normally would, because it numbs your feelings. And at least that's how it worked for me. That's how it was in my experience. Most users, most times, will, once they become, serious addicts, will commit crimes, and in some cases, violent crime to feed their disease. Most of the users I know from my time are, end up penniless and or homeless. Street level dealers and gang members who are using their product and have access to illegal firearms are more susceptible to commit an act of violence using a firearm. Dealers and gang members, at least the ones that I know, most of them don't believe they have a drug problem, and it's very taboo within the culture I work within or come from to speak on matters such as mental health, let alone ask for help. So users or clientele in some cases can't pay debts, and this leads to violence. Street level dealers and gangs versus other street level dealers and gangs violently battle for sales and turf. Users overdosing and dying, I consider this a great violence against our society. And then in my case, at one point, every user will hit absolute rock bottom and wants to try to get help, and actually finds that there are very little resources, limited detox beds available, and long waiting times to get one of those beds. Users can't find jobs a lot of times because of their disability. Sometimes it can be based on things like their appearance, and even sometimes just a lack of a home address. Things along those lines, those things contribute to the violence. A lot of the agencies rooted in harm reduction do not receive meaningful and sustainable funding, which again leads to the mess. And this all leads, the user, at least in my case, to feel discouraged and end up digging deeper into addiction, and continues to fuel the machine that manufactures the violence that my organization battles every day. So just something for the listeners to think about when you hear the word fentanyl or the terms drug use and or abuse. Just know that this drug is not only killing many from the abuse side, but it contributes to the overall violence and gang activity that we're seeing in our city. Thank you.
Marcel, thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience. It's so valuable for us, to hear from you, to hear your voice, because yours is a voice that we rarely ever get to hear, and experience. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce the next person. Kim Curry is the director of Seeds of Hope. She's been the director for 12 years. It's got a number of locations, but their main hub is at 6 St. Joseph Street, right near Yonge and Bloor. And she has been working with people experiencing homelessness for those 12 years. I first came across her when we started that food program, and I'm just in awe of the work that you do, Kim, every day. The homeless, people experiencing homelessness in the city, pretty much, well, a lot of them. I don't know if you know all of them, but you certainly know a lot of them. You know where they are, you know what their needs are, and you're out there, securing them and making sure that they get food and the, medical treatment and housing when they're ready. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Can you talk about what are you seeing on the streets? Oh, one of the things, and I'll just start with this. In a conversation a while ago, you told me that you knew of 17 people who had died, who were experiencing homelessness, who had died in the previous month. But you said that you've got an update on that number. Can you tell us what is happening on the streets and what is fentanyl doing to people who are experiencing homelessness?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all the panelists and everyone involved, because this is a very important crisis, epidemic. I think I know about 3 people that have died of the COVID pandemic, and over 150 people that have died through this opioid crisis, and a lot of other contributing factors. I think fentanyl also acts as a easy access to suicide. There's been a lot of people using fentanyl to kill one another, and there's been multiple deaths. Using fentanyl it's often like Russian roulette. We've all used numbers of Noxalone kits. It's taking more and more Noxalone kits to help to bring someone back alive. Like it, unbelievably, we talk about and people talk about how many times they've died and then come back to life. And it's pretty scary being on top of someone with blue lips that have died and wondering if that Noxalone is going to work. The human impact of this is devastating. It's every one of the people involved in this came by it through medicating pain physically, mentally, emotionally, and all of those, in many of those cases, innocently. And this is something that grips so tightly. It's profound. The families that have to deal with this also are just racked with desperation and fear. And I do want our guests that are here that are living this every day to speak. So I'll just briefly say one of my biggest frustrations is we have many people that want help, many, and we feel we have nothing. We do have, and it was mentioned by the doctor at the beginning, we need to change some of our methodology. What worked for one addiction is not working for fentanyl. Traditionally, getting someone into a detox is close to impossible. It's almost never immediate. When someone does want to get into a detox, my feelings is it should be immediate. The way a detox is set up is they're not medical. I know that KMH does have a medical one, but that's almost impossible to get into. So basically, someone's asked to go into a room, sit on a cot. If they leave, they've left. They're not allowed to smoke or do anything. And the process of pain they have to endure from 10 to 14 days is like the flu times 100. It's someone said it's like the bubonic plague. So for people to have to sit in that and go through that and not be expected to leave, that they could leave and for $5 have all that pain go away, it's preposterous. So I personally, we have men's recovery homes. We don't have anyone with fentanyl in those homes. They don't get to treatment. They don't get to that stage. And people are full of despair. So people don't even try anymore. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the suicides. So this system does need to be rehauled. So we can save some lives.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kim, so much for all the work that you do, and thank you for being here. And you've brought a couple of guests, Tony and Joanne, who have lived experience. Joanne, I haven't met you. I don't know if we've met. You look familiar, but I'm not sure. But Tony and I met, and we were just discussing this before the meeting started, under the Gardiner Expressway 1.5 years ago. And at that time, Tony, when I'd met you, you had actually just walked back to your tent encampment under the Gardiner barefoot. Can you tell a little bit about what happened there, just as a way of introducing yourself and talk about your experience?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Chris, for having me here, and thank you for taking the time to actually go personally down under the Gardiner with Kim that time to see how people were suffering during that COVID outbreak, when there was nowhere to get warm, and even so people that were outside like myself and others, we couldn't even warm up. So that's why I asked Kim to help, because I didn't even nowhere to get a source of heat for like 2 weeks. I think nobody had anywhere to warm up, not a public library, nowhere. It was incredible. But yeah, no, I found there's a problem with, there's a lot of stigma around addiction and homelessness, and a lot of that was coming from the reason I was it wasn't particularly that time, but I told you the story about the time where there was a young schizophrenic woman. It was like -20 out, and I found her walking down Yonge Street in the middle of the night, and she was oblivious to anything because she was in a mental health state. She had nothing on her feet. She had no, and her toes were turning purple. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my God, like, where's your shoes? She didn't know. So like I could see that she's going to be possibly lose her toes, that, like, didn't know if it was too late. Then I tried to get her into the 7-Eleven, which were the 24-hour 7-Eleven right on, Dundas and Yonge there. And the security guards wouldn't let her in, wouldn't let me in. And I was trying to explain to them that, she can lose her feet. She's got to warm up her feet. I got to find her some shoes. They wouldn't let her in. They thought it was really funny. And I thought that was really disgusting. And there's lots of people that have similar experiences with that kind of behavior. But I had to give her my shoes, to get her down on the subway and stuff, because I could survive a few minutes. I don't know how long she was without shoes. She was hard to communicate with, but that was the reason why, but I think a lot of that's a problem
for her. And so tell us a little bit about your experience.
My experience with the fentanyl, as far as directly with the fentanyl crisis, yes, it's something like I haven't seen before. It's a huge problem. I think what the statistics that we were talking about earlier is, I don't know how much of the public really knows. I'm shocked by some of the statistics I'm hearing from people. That's why I wanted to find a place if we can verify. I'm staying in one of the shelters, the shelter hotels program. It's a wonderful program, except for there's a few problems with it that we can see, and a lot of them are just human problems. I've noticed. I don't know if somebody's talked about this. Maybe the fellow that's on your panel with the that was in the gang and the crime related stuff. Maybe can help me. Sorry, yeah, I didn't catch his name. Thanks, John. He maybe he's familiar with this, but I think for me, the fentanyl crisis in itself is a problem with the drug itself. I think when you have people taking advantage of this problem, I know there's a large percentage of what we call overdoses that are actual hotshot murders. And I know that's a concern. I know he could probably confirm that. And that's one of my concerns is with that there's some bad element of society that actually take advantage of the situation.
I've heard that term 3 times in the last couple of weeks. Kim mentioned it to me in earlier conversation, and I was speaking to a guy in another homeless encampment this week who mentioned this hot shots, that a dealer will deliberately give somebody a lethal dose of fentanyl.
Or other addicts are paid to do it or whatever, or sometimes it's becoming so common. I've heard it used around, as something, I hate that guy, let's hot shot him or whatever, in that almost a casual sense. It's becoming a problem in itself. I think you spoke about some kind of possibly, I don't know. The other problem we have is in the shelters, people are alone in their rooms. And so they're only checked on, they're trying to balance privacy with of course, which is important to a human being. And which I think it's great in the hotel program, but then people that are using have a higher risk of not get help when they go down. But there's been several solutions offered. One of them was to give everybody Fitbits that record heart and the vital signs can go if somebody's going down to the front desk. They can know exactly which person and they can respond to that Fitbit. That's been offered. I don't know why nobody's taken that. I've mentioned that to over a year ago, but there's been problems with people thinking about privacy issues, et cetera, cost maybe. Bella was willing to donate some stuff.
I think the biggest issue, if I may say, is the normalization of this, right? Like it's overly normalized on the street and not, I've recently experienced homelessness for the first time in my life. I have 21 years of paying rent and leases in Toronto. So with a different education and different background, I kind of have a different look at it. And I've had, a person in my life who their addiction ended me up out here. I've never done it, but they're basically being in my life, and their addiction made me homeless, right? Like that's sentence alone. And there's a lot of other people out here, people we know from Bellwoods as well. Like they never ever did fentanyl, but you know, they've died from it because someone blew it in their face by accident. Like the casualness of this dangerous poison that the doctor said, which was, you know, very accurate when she was describing the different kinds of fentanyl that can, you know, be found in some are tampered with and whatever. It's all poison, and there's a common thing I'm hearing lately. People say, "Oh, please don't blow that near me. I'm allergic to it." Well, aren't we all? Right. So that's if I could leave it with that. I think it's the normal. I think, but like given this conversation, it's overly normalized.
And are you saying that the fentanyl is overly normalized?
Yeah,
Or
yes. In the street culture, the usage of fentanyl is overly normalized, but then in the outreach culture, like the boardroom versus street, right?
Yeah.
In the boardroom, it's almost ignored. So there's no bridge gap. So you have people going willy-nilly, and then other people who don't even know what the problem, the pandemic exists. And you know, I've lost as many friends as Kim have in the outreach work that we do, right? The numbers are similar.
My main concern was possibly that I think personally, one of the solutions is to, as quickly as possible, move to a safe supply and a harm reduction, like a model like a methadone type of system, because you don't see any methadone gangs running around town. I mean, I haven't heard of any methadone gangs running around town robbing people. And methadone is highly addictive, but it's been sold. Not many people are overdosing from it. So I don't know why we haven't moved that to that sooner. Plus, I think the other issue that I really want to bring up is that because I know there's a large percentage, and I don't know if Marcel will agree with me, but there are murders being used because there's so many accidental overdoses. It's easy to hide a murder using an overdose of fentanyl. And I know some of these, in some cases that I know for a fact, that it was obviously a murder. Everybody in the hotel knows this person was murdered. There's no investigation, and it always comes up as an accidental overdose on the coroner's report. You know, there was one case where somebody was burned 75% of their body burns, causing death, and their death certificate said accidental overdose. I don't know how that's possible, but I think it needs to get looked at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
To be honest with you, if I may very quickly, my biggest fear is that my family will think that I died from an overdose if I touch it or breathe it in. Like I really am fear of the accidental overdose, right? Like I've had to run in the 2 weeks I've been at one shelter. I've had to run away from someone casually smoking it in a public area by the door, and it's downtown too. It's outreach. Like it's not just even this one shelter, right? Like there's places I kind of, oh God, is that? And you cover your mouth, right? Like. That's what scares me. Like, are we like how is, you know, some of the times there's children in these areas, right? Like, I don't feel like Toronto was really realizing that we need to help the addicts use in safe spaces instead of having somebody sneak around the corner and blow something, right? Like, you know, yeah, I know about the injection sites, and I've been to almost all of them in the city at one time or another. I frequent Moss Park a lot, other Park Jail, other places. And the hours of operation in which they can stay open do not meet the schedule of most users, right? Like, and then what happens when they get home alone at night, like Tony pointed out, the isolation of the rooms or the shelters, or right? You know, sometimes the one picture they have of a lot of these things are connected to traumas, right? We know this: addiction, alcoholism, use of heroin. Like this is heroin again, everybody, right? Like I feel like fentanyl is hiding. The opiate is hiding under the word fentanyl, but it's heroin had its heyday, so everybody knows what that is. But it basically is that, right?
Right, and people are just becoming familiar with this. So tell me, so you're talking about, and Tony, you've talked about it. You've talked about this hot shotting of you know, these murders that are taking place on the streets and not being investigated. What's it like? And both you and Joanne, if you could respond, what's it like to be, you know, experiencing homelessness with that kind of culture? Like, must be terribly, you know, frightening to be in that situation.
Sometimes it is, but you know, my main concern is that there's a lot of that. It's not being addressed, and you know, I have a lot of friends. I know some people that have lost.
Really speak to it. I'm
very
blessed. I'm a very protected poverty life. Like I can't really speak to that, but like, yeah, like you know, the streets are tough. Yes, no matter what goes on, the streets are very tough. Shelters are tough. The red tape is tough. The poverty loops are tough. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what's concerning is that there's a lot of people that have lost their whole families to fentanyl in the last few months, and a lot of friends. I've lost friends. There's people that are dealing with so much uh, grief that they're not addressing, and the PTSD. I think for years to come, we're going to be dealing with people with, trying to get through this crisis afterwards. If there's a solution for it, just from the trauma that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
Every day there's people dying.
And that's not being normalized too. We can't even react properly to that because of the numbers, right? Like in the outreach world, typically 10 years ago, maybe I would lose 3 to 4 of my favorite outreach friends, right? And now that could be a day, right? Like,
You
yeah, you
lose-
can hear about 3 to 4 different people in the outreach world in Toronto passing away any given week that I knew and interacted with, possibly within a recent period of time.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's becoming the dead. Yes, the so and so's gone. Oh my god, that, and then
So
like
you were losing 3 to 4 friends a
no,
week.
like they're not in the outreach world. People known, not necessarily friends. This is what I need to qualify.
Yeah.
There is a network, and Kim obviously is part of this, and a couple hundred other amazing people in the city.
Mhm.
What is often referred to as ad hoc outreach, meaning we know the supplies and chains and demands in certain areas. When I started experiencing homelessness, I found a way with Kim and some other friends and people. Tony was a big part of this as well. Using my skill set from my background to help tighten the pipeline distribution on more of a 24/7 level in the encampment areas that I was in, or anywhere where I had, family, brethren, people we're looking out for, right? Like this is how it works. People look out for people and make sure people who are less capable to get their own socks, right? And then, maybe they help me not be so lonely, even though they're less mentally capable, right? Like there's symbiotic relationships on the street and the network of people who take care of each other. So within that world, right? Like you'll go in to volunteer somewhere and you hear like, oh, so that girl's gone, oh my God, right? So I'm not, in terms of personal friends, it's been 17 in the last year for me that were personal friends. And then beyond that, within the homeless community and the community of outreach, I prefer to call it, right? Because sometimes it's outreach for people who are.
I've had actually.
You said, and actually, I want to get to some questions from the audience here too. But you said, Joanne, just to clarify, you've lost 17 friends
In the
plus
last calendar year to
the last
fentanyl.
calendar year.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I have to agree with you and say that normalization. I've had several people just recently tell me they've just basically given up. They basically resolved to accept that they're going to die soon.
Yeah.
And they're living their life out. They figured one fellow said, I think he was only like 25 years old. How old is Dow? Oh, sorry,
There's a lot of, there is a problem
but
with the younger
he
generation.
said, I give up. I'm going to
Yeah.
be gone in 3 months anyway, at the most. So.
It
Right.
seems being targeted.
And it's sad to hear from young people that are, have a life to live, that they've just given up.
Yes, that's what I've heard, is that fentanyl is a death sentence.
And it's it's culturally overlapping, right? That's something we need to look at too. It's hitting every demographic. It's culturally overlapping. It's, problem in the Muslim community. It's a problem in the Jamaican community. Problem, you see a lot of East Coasters out here, some really good ones having a really hard time. It's really sad for this mama to see it like this. Like it really is. Like, and everyone's doing their best, but it needs to be more of an actual function with the city in it, right?
Yeah, we're going to actually, and we're going to get to solutions towards the end of the meeting, because I want to take a couple of questions. So the first one is, what are the sources of supply to the homeless? Does anybody want to talk about, like, where does fentanyl in particular coming from? And Marcel, this is something you and I have talked about, because you said before, the gang leader was the wholesaler. He was the importer, like he was the source for the drugs. Fentanyl's changed that game a bit.
Oh, for sure. It really started, I would say, with the whole, Oxycontin boom, where it wasn't necessarily, a street drug per se. So I think fentanyl fits in the same category. You can literally order it online. It all depends on how motivated you are and what risks you're willing to take. But it's definitely more accessible to broader society than, let's say, heroin was. And again, to touch on Tony and Joanne's point, is that it's less stigmatized than heroin. When you hear about heroin, people's hair on the neck stand up, where, fentanyl seems to be a passing conversation. People talk about it. So yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to access.
Okay. And Leslie, I'll give you this next question. Why are opioids still being prescribed by doctors?
So, I think there's been a fair reduction. I wish I had some numbers, but, since things became clear around, 2013, 2014, there was a big effort for physicians to stop prescribing as much. And then, of course, that caused its own problem, because sometimes deprescribing too fast is really harmful for people. So there's a bit of a balance there. People are still in pain, and it's a treatment. It's a treatment to reduce that pain, and whether doctors can be the gatekeeper that they should be, I don't know. I think that I'd be interested to hear other people's opinions if we're doing that in the right way. But we are still prescribing for pain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it was that at one time, and I've talked to different generations of doctors with different medical, different periods of medical training. At one point, heroin, or opioids, were only prescribed if you were palliative or in extreme circumstances. And then, and we saw with what happened with Purdue Pharmaceuticals in the States, they tried to downplay the addictiveness of these drugs, of the opioids, and OxyContin, became widely prescribed and led to a whole, in the States, they talk about oxy parties at high schools, and this whole huge generation of people experiencing addiction. And have we gone back to where we were, or are we somewhere in the middle?
I think we're somewhere in the middle. And you're right. Opioids used to be prescribed rarely, and in other countries, we're one of the highest prescribing, us in the U.S. People are have to go through stages of trying to work with their pain in different ways. Whereas North America, during that Purdue influence, there were programs to in hospitals where we tried to make pain zero. It was a real push the other way to make sure that people weren't experiencing any pain. And now we're sort of going back to what you were talking about, those older days. So we're still in the middle, and I think trying to figure out the best route forward.
Okay. And I've heard, so there's a question here, and I don't know if we have a panelist who can actually answer it, but the schedule of the safe injection sites. And I was on the Toronto Board of Health when we had the debates and ultimately voted to open the safe injection sites. But Tony and Joanne, you're saying that, the sites just, being open, in the daytime is not when people are necessarily using. And so I don't know if anybody can talk about, the question is, can we change the schedule of the safe injection sites? Is that an easy fix? And for me, the other thing I want to talk about is, when we were listening to the deputants at the Toronto Board of Health, and each time there were 20 to 30 deputants, a lot of people with lived experience with addiction, the insanity of the safe injection sites really occurred to me, because you've got somebody coming with a street drug to get a clean needle from a nurse and to inject this street drug into their system, while the nurse watches in case there's a toxic overdose, toxic load in that injection, so that then they can try to revive the person with naloxone. Like this, the insanity of that, that you're actually going to watch this person in a safe injection site. What do people think? Like, what is the thinking around safe injection sites? Like, should we be going to safe supply?
Safe supply.
Open that to anybody who wants
Safe supply for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's the only way to go, and I think that's the only way to get the money and violence and the gangs out of the picture. That's where I think 90% of all the deaths could be avoided, like right there. And you're gonna have save resources and put that towards treatment for people, like more immediate beds available in detox and whatnot.
And if I could elaborate, I 100% agree. When it comes to the current situation of the injection sites, We look at it similar to dealing with youth and gun and gang violence. You can have a program that's open till 9 or 10 p.m., but that's not when the real stuff is going on. We need to get to the kids at the hours that they operate in, between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. is when we really need to get at these kids. Second of all, I strongly agree with Tony as far as using the, I believe, Portugal's model. I don't have it in front of me. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they've actually reduced crime dramatically by legalizing a lot of these drugs. I know that's an unpopular notion for a lot of people, but if you look at the statistics, if you look at the data, it definitely drives down and drives out the criminal equation from the drug use.
And Leslie, I'd like to ask you about that. What is, in the medical community, what is the feeling about safe supply?
So there's some, I think there's universal agreement that it would be great to have, injectable opioids that are, that are safe and that people can use with people watching. There's certainly, I think Tony brought up methadone and Suboxone. So methadone and Suboxone are two treatments. They are opioids, and some people call that safer supply, but we can also call it maintenance treatment, and that's certainly helpful. Sometimes people are prescribed opioids that they can take home and inject on their own. And that might be, like, I think there's people on both sides of that, and we're doing research to see if that's effective and if it. Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Sorry, I'm just hearing from. Personally, I'm not a fentanyl user, but I'm right in the middle of all of it. I've had the misfortune of using it once and died, so I don't do it again. But having said that, I don't think people that are the Suboxone program and the Dilaudid program that was out, I think is, in my opinion, a total failure because I'm finding more people have sell their Dilaudid to get fentanyl because the fentanyl is way too powerful. And even heroin, people that are, once they're on fentanyl, they don't even get high on heroin. Never mind Dilaudid, don't do anything for them. They're selling on the street for $2 a piece because nobody wants them. And there's so many out there now from people from the Dilaudid program. If you're going to do a fentanyl, if you're going to do something as far as safe, like a safe supply and doing like a methadone model with it, I think the street user, it's going to have to be fentanyl to get them into the program.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for that perspective, Tony. Kim, you seem to be agreeing with what Tony was saying. You've heard similar things.
Yeah. Well, I think there's many spokes to the wheel on treatment, and I think a lot of choices need to be made. The Suboxone for someone is a good medical treatment to get off of it. Basically, you should be on it for 7 days, and we have people on it for a year. So we have a bit of abuse from the pharmaceutical market with methadone and Suboxone. And then basically, I would say 99% of the people I know that are on them are also doing fentanyl. So this is why it needs a much stronger, and remember, this drug goes to the prefrontal cortex of your brain, your decision-making process. And so how are we expecting people to make a decision or a willpower decision, which is impossible with addiction and all the addictions, with something this powerful? And what we're seeing is people that their behavior is just gone in a whole other direction. We're seeing symptomatic, something that could be symptomatic of the addiction, but it appears like a mental illness.
Okay. You know what? Actually, I've got a good question to follow up with that. And people are asking a couple of questions here. One is what is the composition of fentanyl? Is it opiate-based? Is it synthetic? And what does it do in the body that ends in such severe withdrawal? So I don't know, maybe Leslie, could you talk about that? About, what actually is, what is it chemically, what is it, and what is it doing to your mind or to your body?
Sure. So it's an opioid, and all the different substances go into the brain, and they have their own unique receptors. And so these opioid receptors are the same receptors, that OxyContin would go into, or heroin. So fentanyl goes there, but they interact in that receptor so powerfully. So they send such a strong signal, and then the receptor gets used to the fentanyl being there. So it down regulates, so it gets lazy. And then when the fentanyl is not there, then that's why you get withdrawal, because the brain has adapted in some ways. And opioid withdrawal, some people say, I think Kim said, it's the flu times 100, or 1,000. It's just so painful. And what it does mentally, again, to Kim's point, changes a person's behavior so much. That can be one of the most devastating parts, is that somebody's self and who they are might change to a degree, which is also traumatizing if your behavior is really unlike yourself because you've been so unwell related to the fentanyl. That's part of the devastation.
Marcel was talking about that as well, that he was using drugs to mask the pain of his conscience when he was, it made him more violent, allowed you to be more violent. Can you talk a little bit about that, Marcel? So when you were experiencing addiction, and then you went through withdrawal, what was that experience like for you? And did it change your personality?
Absolutely. Almost undescribable. I've been shot. I've been stabbed. I've been through like almost every type of physical violence you can think of, every type of emotional violence you can think of. And here in my case, we're talking about like pill version of opiates, and whatnot. And that in itself, it was completely the worst and most pain that I've ever experienced in my life. It's like I can't even articulate it. Crawling out of your skin. They have all these terms, but I mean, I can't even, to me, at certain points, suicide was the only option. And thankfully I got through that, but that's the only way I can really, but then while using it, before I understood that I had an addiction, it seems to have this ability to numb, your emotions. And I don't just mean bad ones. So in my case, I was the leader of a very large gang here in Canada, and I was responsible for quite a bit of the badness happening in the city. I'm not a monster, and I'm not an animal. I had to cope, and I did this secretly. If my colleagues at the time knew that I was addicted, they would have killed me. So it's something that I had to keep hidden. But eventually, once I had gotten out of the game, that was the biggest elephant in the room that I kind of had to address, and it was horrific, absolutely horrific.
Would they have? So you're saying if they'd found out that you were addicted, that would have been a death sentence for you. They would have killed you. Is it because you were untrustworthy because of the addiction?
Absolutely. We're the ones selling it. We're like, as far as the importing and exporting goes on a higher scale, I am privy to information at the time that, is detrimental to the organizations, and police, mental health service people, the government knows that all they have to really do in a lot of cases, especially when somebody in my position, is throw me in a room and let me suffer. And at some point I'll crack, right? So just as much as the government is aware of that, these organizations are aware of that. So yeah, it makes you vulnerable, and it makes you a liability.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. The other question I've got here is, let's see. Does anybody know about this program, RAMS, R-A-M-S? So maybe, Ellen in the chat, could you just give us a description of what that is? Could you just put that in the chat as well?
So it was discussed with the doctor. It's the rapid access. It's just it's so theoretical in so many cases. So I know it was mentioned you can walk in and you can't get in. So it's and maybe there's certain ones you can, and there's certain ones you can at a time. But when someone's in this level of distress, to find out which one, everyone has to go through central access to get to the these places, and this is what I'm saying, the barriers to access. You're asking someone, it's like asking someone with 2 broken legs to run 100 meters. Like, they can crawl and they might get there, but it doesn't make sense how we've got it set up right now.
Mm-hmm. So what are you seeing for people? Like, if somebody comes to you and they want to go to detox and then they want to, actually go into treatment so they can overcome their addiction, what are you seeing in trying to access that treatment for people?
So generally for treatment, you have to go to detox first. To get someone into detox, you have to call central access detox number. Generally, they say call back in an hour, call back in an hour. During the pandemic, there was 2 open with, I think, 5 and 10 beds. So but others are back open now. But
how long would it take to get somebody a bed?
It can take weeks. And you have someone without a phone, they've lost everything. They've got everything. And then we have the situation of when you get to treatment, a lot of treatment centers won't take they won't deal with an opioid and an alcohol addiction, or like it's one barrier to the next. But what I'm saying about the fentanyl, the opioid addiction, no one even gets through, like very few people would get through detox. Like, they need a medical detox at the very least to get through this pain. And so CAMH does have they do have one, but it's literally impossible for people. Like, you almost have to be sober to get through all the meetings and all the things you need to do to get accepted there. That's been our experience. I'm not saying that other people, when people go to emergency, in all of the hospitals, we have people set back out, even if in the midst of this they're suicidal. And there is a lot of mental health that is existing on the street, and it's if there's an addiction, we have hospitals shooing people away because they're saying, well, go deal with the addiction first.
Yeah,
so it's just like, it's excruciating for people. So I've had people that have literally said, Kim, lock me in the basement, give me food, and hug me every day. That's all I need. Like, they're just saying, they're exasperated. And I don't even, I feel exasperated with someone trying to help people move through this when there isn't acceptable options. So I give them $10 so they can go do the drug again. Like, it's ridiculous.
So you're saying people are so desperate to get off of the drug, they can't get into a treatment that would actually work for them.
Yeah.
And so they're just saying, just lock me in the basement.
They said, lock me in because it's not fun. Once you're completely addicted, there's no high. They're not having fun. They're existing. So it goes from doing it to escape pain, and then it turns into, I need to do this just to be normal, just to be alive for the day. I have to do this. And that's what, at the stage where people will do things they never would have done ever, or even thought of doing to their best friends, to get that. And that's when they know they have to get off of it, but it's impossible to go through the ridiculous system we have right now.
Okay, so it's hard to get somebody into detox. And
all together. Yeah.
How long does detox take? So if you've got somebody who's addicted to fentanyl, they come in and say they can get into the medical detox program at CAMH. Leslie, how long would that program last?
So 7 to 14 days.
Okay, and then the drug is out of their system. Are they still addicted to the drug? Like,
yes.
Yes. So then what's the next step in overcoming the addiction? You've detoxed. What's the next step in overcoming the addiction?
So detox now, because people have learned that, from many bad experiences, if somebody stops the drug and just stops it cold turkey and goes through detox and then goes back out, there's more than a 95% chance that they're going to use again, but their tolerance has gone down because they've detoxed. And so they're at such huge risk of overdosing that we don't even do that anymore. So when someone comes in, for detox, they generally start Suboxone or methadone, and that's part of the detox process that holds them and makes them more comfortable and reduces cravings. And the intention is to be on that, for at least 6 months, and that makes a huge difference in making it doable to get through all the powerful cravings and that addictive state that you asked about.
Okay, so for 6 months, but there's also whatever led them to be on, addicted, whatever social or mental health issues led them to have the addiction still need to be dealt with. So even if you detox and you're on, stabilizing on Suboxone, there must be a need for treatment for the mental health and other issues that led you to be addicted.
Yeah, definitely. And, our detox is run by a psychiatrist. So at the same time, you're getting an assessment, but as probably everybody here knows, it's really hard to fix something with just a medication that's been so powerful, like trauma. So therapy is needed too. And sometimes it's hard to find enough therapists, get somebody, the kind of one-on-one support that they might need. So it's a bit of a patchwork. Definitely there can be an assessment and medications that can help and can make actually sometimes a huge difference and give somebody that like little edge that or take off that edge that was making it even harder for them to go to reach their goals.
Kim, you've told me about a residential program that Seeds of Hope runs. Have you seen a successful pathway out of addiction?
Yeah, we have it. So for us, this is another stage that we need to see more of, is when we receive people in our residential program, they've actually gone through detox and treatment and have had sobriety for at least 3 months. And so what was just being said is also, it's once you go back into your same environment or leave too early and a lot of the core issues aren't dealt with, then it's very easy to just, the recidivism rate is very high. But if you have time to address the other core issues, there could be trauma, mental health, and just living in an environment that's positive and healthy. What we do with people now is people come out with the very best intentions after treatment. Some people have gone through 3, 6 months, even a year of treatment with the best of intentions and go back into their same environment. And it's very quick that
the temptation is just too great.
And the constructs, yeah.
Right. So you need a different environment. If you're actually going to overcome your addiction, you need to move out of the environment that, where you were addicted.
And that's in some cases, like, as you mentioned at the beginning, there's many different ways. Like some people had a broken leg and they're a fentanyl user now. Like they didn't have any other issues, or like those are the complexities that are.
Okay. So if you were to design, so I want to come to solutions now. I want to talk about, so what do we need to change in our society, in our medical treatments, and detox, et cetera, and in order to overcome this epidemic, because there are 2,400 people who died last year of overdoses in the province of Ontario. And, Joanne was talking about knowing 17 people, just herself, 17 friends who died in the last year. I mean, the numbers are absolutely staggering. This is an epidemic of death, due to these opioids, in particular with fentanyl. So what do we need to overcome this. If you could draft the legislation or the policy or develop the program that would actually help to overcome this, because, and I'll say one other thing, this is not just a problem in Toronto. This is across the province. You know, Sudbury's got the highest per capita drug addiction issue in the province. Thunder Bay's got a massive issue with this. It's every community in the province is dealing with this issue. So if you were to develop a program, where would you start? What do we need to do in terms of solutions? And
I think,
Tony.
are you asking everyone or?
Yeah, Tony, go ahead.
I would, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt or cut in, but yeah, definitely a safe supply. Take the money equation out of it. That would take the criminal element out of it. And one thing I wanted to bring up is, you know, because you talked about how a person's core behavior and values are changed when they're withdrawing or on this drug. It really is that powerful. I think there's an evil criminal element in society that has taken advantage of that as well. Of course, you know, when you have this kind of a person that's vulnerable, there's worse addictions on the planet than substance abuse. There's people that are addicted to power and greed and money that are willing to take human lives, and human trafficking has become an issue around this. People have, you agree? And I'm come across, and I have to sad to say, and it's common knowledge on the street, that there are, I believe, even in some instances, I hate to say it, but there's been law enforcement that have, you know, have been corrupted into taking advantage of the situation, and I mean that because I think it's really important to understand that these are vulnerable people that are now being preyed upon, even some pretty nasty predators.
Right. Thank you. So safe supply, and you know what, Tony, we are so privileged to have you as part of this conversation. You know, please interrupt at any time, because and the thing that you just said, that there are worse addictions than substances in this planet. And
yeah, we need a substance to get our, you know, get high on predators, and people that get high on power need a human being for their you know, hit.
Yeah,
you know, they need somebody else's pain to get off on. Come on, that's way worse.
There's a lot of wisdom in those words. Thank you. Okay, so let's continue with this. So safe supply seems to be the first step that people are asking for in order to overcome this epidemic that we've got, because it does take the criminal element out of it. Marcel, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, you know, through this conversation, you know, I've, you know, institutions such as CAMH, I think, have taken a few blows as far as, you know, their role in this, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think that if there was more sustainable funding, if there was more federal money, provincial money that went into opening more, having more access. So in my experience, when I came to the realization that it's death or quit, the process, you know, for me to get, and I medically detoxed at CAMH, and I'm very grateful actually for that experience. But it did take me a month to get in, and you know, the person I spoke to on the phone when I was trying to get in was pretty much like, hang in there, you know, if you can make it till this date, you know, you know, and then when that date comes, you have to be there on time and ready to go and whatever, because if you're not, if you're sleeping through it, something happens, the process starts again. But once so I would say solution wise is we need 1,000 more CAMHs, and that's more of immediate solution. And as Kim brought up, like, you know, no wait times. When a person walks in and is ready, you know, you take them then and there. That's a critical moment in a person's life. And then again, to elaborate on what Tony was saying, absolutely, you know, this particular drug is being used viciously, you know, for murders. Hot doses is actually a thing that's been around for a long time. It's just, I guess, more prevalent now. Human trafficking, even in my world, in my realm, you know, one of the ways that we, you know, forced people into that situation was you purposefully get them addicted to a substance like that. Another thing that wasn't really touched on is we're starting to see fentanyl in other drugs mixed in with cocaine, mixed in with like even weed. So again, the fact that it's so addictive, the people in power who are putting this stuff out are trying to gain more clientele. Again, the whole end of it is capital gains. But and then a lot more education about it, I think, like in the preschool kind of state, like to our young people. I work with a lot of teenagers that are involved in gangs who sip lean, who do Fenny, who you name it, and to them it's just part of the culture, and they really have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And because they're involved in gangs and think they're tough, just like I believed, I'll never forget the first guy who handed me a Percocet to come down off of a cocaine high, told me, like, don't take too much of these, man. You'll get addicted. They'll get you. I was like, bullshit. Nothing could get me like that. He was right.
One other issue that we haven't talked about tonight too is in the Canada Mental Health Act, you can commit somebody to a hospital only if they are a danger to them, an immediate danger to themselves or to others. And I've heard, discussions about this, that, with fentanyl, and Kim, you talked about it, like people will start the detox process and it's just so painful that they will go out, and so is medical detox enough to overcome that, that pain that you have to go through in order to detox? Or do we need people to sign or commit to being into for the full detox process? Anybody? Leslie?
Sure. So, it's a really interesting question. The only time we're really certifying somebody these days is if somebody is really intoxicated and slurring and trying to leave, and we're afraid they could die immediately, then we'll want to support them until we feel like they're well enough to go, or they can make a decision to stay. That sounds almost like a Ulysses clause. If you sign up and then want to leave but can't, I think we wouldn't be able to do that. I think we would have to always go with what the person says at that time. If they want to go, then they can go. But we are getting better at getting rid of that extremely difficult first couple of days. So we're just a lot more aggressive medications now, making it more comfortable. And Marcel mentioned some comments about CAMH, and that is fine. CAMH, we are humbled by this problem, and we know we have a ton to learn, and I've learned a ton tonight. So I appreciate all the comments.
Yeah, it is, and I recognize the difficulty of this issue, because there was a long period of history when psychiatric hospitals, where people were being committed and then subjected just horrific torture and experiments in psychiatric hospitals. And so there's a lot of pushback on any sort of certifying somebody. So I appreciate just how complex this issue is. Let's see. So we've got somebody, and what I'm hearing, being suggested by the panelists in terms of solutions is you create a safe supply that helps to reduce, the gangs and the guns and the violence out there. And it also makes it so that people are not subject to a dealer. And then you open up detox, and it seems like medical detox is the type of treatment that most people are going to need in order to go through the detox process. But then they need to transition. And Kim, you've been talking about, a residential program, because you can't go back into the environment where you were addicted without going back into the addiction. And so you need some sort of long-term residential program. And how long does that program need to be? Like, and I'm sure it'll vary by individuals, but like approximately, like what is the range?
Leave people there from like a year to 3 years. I think you were the one who sent me someone that some people lifelong have to live in a supportive community. Basically, your social constructs have to change. Like you might have lost your job or lost your family. You might need to reestablish those connections. But putting someone back into isolation also is something that doesn't work. And just going back to the necessary requirements, if you're harm to oneself or to another, that you can be committed. I just find that this is just, and I understand it's a problem of resource, but we have people killing themselves and others, and like we've had people giving birth that have been snowbanks, that have been on fentanyl and other drugs for their entire duration of their pregnancy. Like we have people doing that, and we don't seem to have people with extreme schizophrenia on the streets, running around in bare feet in the middle of winter, and that's not enough. That's not, you're hurting yourself. So what is it? It just seems like a nebulous. And I feel like if our society knew that there is a segment of society that we're absolutely ignoring, and it is affecting the rest of society. Like, this is not who we want to be as human beings. But I feel it's more people aren't aware than they just think, oh, who cares about these people? Like, because it's as you've heard tonight, we have some pretty articulate, eloquent, amazing people that are living in this.
You know, this is one of the things that really does concern me, is that we're normalizing people living on the street, that, you know, we're normalizing people living in tents, that we're normalizing, you know. And I heard from the Community Living Toronto, they say that 20% of people who are in shelters have intellectual disabilities. And that seems, and, you know, the number of people with mental health, even the people that I've delivered meals to, I know of at least 3 that either have been, I've been told have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, or they've told me that they're on an antipsychotic they've told me that they're on a medication, and sometimes their medication gets stolen. And I know it as an antipsychotic medication because my brother is schizophrenia, you know. So I know at least 3 people on streets who have schizophrenia. Like this is where we're, you know, we're not providing the kind of supports for people with intellectual disabilities and severe mental health issues. But they're on our streets and they're suffering, and it does impact the community. You're absolutely right about that. I've got a couple of more questions here. How can we combat attitudes that discredit the struggles of or outright blame people who are suffering from the fentanyl epidemic?
I can on that one. That's, you know, we face a similar thing when it comes to crime and violence. And my best answer would be, you could look at countries that have zero infrastructure when it comes to combating drugs. You could take Afghanistan, for instance, you know, not currently controlled by the Taliban. And, you know, there's a huge opiate addiction problem there, that being one of the sources of opium and heroin. And, you know, if you watch documentaries and stuff, they have the attitude of just throw them in a room and cast them from society and let them shake it out. Obviously, it doesn't work, you know. So before you have that kind of attitude, talk to somebody who's been through it, talk to somebody going through it, you know, ask their opinions and learn more about the subject matter before you make a solid decision.
Okay. The next question is, any ideas for prevention? Like, how do we prevent this from getting worse? Like, we're already at this epidemic level.
Destigmatize.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the stuff that perpetuates, you know, the negative aspects of the addiction, you know, problem is just the view and stigma around addicts and the way they're viewed by society. You know, it's just, I think prevention is to, you know, first get a different attitude about, you know, who is an addict and why is an addict, and and there's chemical addictions. I think everybody has different types of addictions, you know, and there's the worst addictions, like as I touched on, I think, then chemical addictions, and you know, addicted to power, people that are taking advantage of the chemical addicts to make money off them. You know, it's like, I mean, how much of a worse person is that? You know, like, and who's worse? And let's face it, there's successful addiction can be managed, and it could be, if people just, you said the resources need to be there for people that are ready to come off it, but it doesn't mean just because a person is an addict that he's you know, not good for anything. I mean, that, you know, it's like, or something morally corrupt with a person. That attitude needs to change, and then maybe things will be able to, you know, change in the future.
Yes. You know what, I think you're absolutely right. There was a gentleman I met years and years ago from Nepal, and it's similar to Afghanistan. The British Empire was the biggest drug dealer of all time, and they were selling opium into China, and that's what led to the Opium Wars and why Hong Kong was part of the British Empire for 200 years. But this one family had come from Nepal, and the grandfather grew up in a rural area where everybody grew opium, and everybody was addicted to opium. And so the grandfather came here, and this was back in the 80s, and he had an addiction. And you know, the grandson that I knew would come to downtown Toronto to buy heroin for his grandfather to, you know, supply his addiction. And yet his grandfather was, you know, a good grandfather and everything, but he lived with this addiction that he developed where he'd grown up. And so there are people, as you said, Tony, who can live with addiction and be functioning members of our society. So we do need to destigmatize this as well. But on the other hand, we also need to make sure that there are pathways out of addiction for those who need it. The other question we've got here is, what can Torontonians tangibly do to support those who are suffering from the fentanyl epidemic? How can we pressure government and elected officials to take this crisis more seriously?
I think that's a question for you, Chris.
Okay, you know what, we do have a petition, and we'll put the petition you know, in the chat, the link to the petition in the chat, and in the messages where we're streaming this on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. But you know, we absolutely need to make sure that governments are aware of what's happening, and this is, I mean, part of my outreach for this is to have conversations like this. The reason that I've brought you together is because I wanted to be more educated about what's happening, and I wanted to provide an opportunity for the community to learn more about what's happening. And it's just so wonderful to have, you know, all of you who are here on this panel to bring your expertise and your experience to educate the community. So you're actually fulfilling this role. And then the next step is we need to build a movement. You know, we need to be, and it's growing. People are starting to become aware. Safe supply is in the media all the time. People are talking about the police. I think it was the Canadian Police Association is talking about asking for a safe supply now, because they recognize that you just can't keep arresting people, you know, who are dealing with an addiction, that this is more of a health issue rather than a criminal issue. Or it can be dealt more effectively as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. And we need to put pressure on, and this is, you know, my role in the opposition, to build housing and to build supportive housing. And we've got models of supportive housing in the city. And there's one just a couple of 100 meters from where I live called Strawn House. And so, you know, it's for the hardest to house people. It's for people who are constantly getting kicked out of shelters. And it's very economically run. It's $24,000 per person per year, which is, you know, half the cost of a shelter bed. And that's with 24/7 wraparound care. So we know the solutions. We do need to build the political will. And that's what part of this movement is about, is building that political will. You know, so I'm going to open it up for final thoughts from the panelists. If each of you would like to take a turn and just, you know, if you have something to say to the audience to wrap up, and then we'll close this, because we're just about out of time. So let's go in the order that we started. So Leslie, you started. So let's have you go first.
Sure. Very incredible that you put this together, Chris, to share all these different perspectives, and we can all learn from each other. As I mentioned, I've learned so much. One of the next steps for us at ChemH is to increase our medical withdrawal beds. So just so people know, we are working on that. It's just a matter of getting nurses. It's so hard to get nurses right now, but we're on our way to increasing. And yeah, just again, to thank everybody for being here and participating to try to find these solutions.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. Marcel.
I think my final thoughts are rooted in what I can do to contribute to help. And I believe that would be awareness, early education. We deal with a lot of minors, we deal with a lot of youth. And I remember back in my day, they would have, at the time it was police, that should change, that would come into the classroom and kind of show, young children, what these drugs are and what they do. And I remember that having an impact on me. So kind of reintroducing that kind of awareness and having preventative early education, workshops. And I am stating here that I promise to hopefully work with everyone on the panel can help me at implementing this into our program.
Wonderful. Yeah. And thank you, Marcel. Thank you for all you're doing. And thank you for bringing your voice, your experience to this table. It's absolutely invaluable. Okay. Kim.
I echo both panels' sentiments, and working together, how important that is to make sure that we're not working in silos, because you do feel like that. I know I do. And so it's wonderful to hear the perspectives that the same sentiments are there, and how do we get that to flesh out and be executed? How do we enforce the ideas and the sentiments or the plans that we have? I think all the solutions are out there. I don't think anyone needs to reinvent, but we do need to implement a lot better, and that comes with having some smart people at the top making some decisions that will impact everyone down here on the ground like us. And how do we do that effectively? And then that's where with policy, that's where we can put funding. And I think people will be behind that, because that will make our society a much better place. We already have people afraid to come to downtown Toronto. And they shouldn't be afraid. They should say that we have to embrace what's happening, and not embrace what it happening in the way of embracing the violence. I mean, embrace that there can be solutions, and we can help with this absolute excruciating human suffering that's happening right now.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much. And thank you for all of the work that you do. It's absolutely incredible. And you save so many lives every year with what you're doing. So thank you. Tony, and I don't know if Joanne is Joanne still with you, Tony?
Joanne. You gonna say, oh no, she's not here.
No. Okay. Do you
She
want to
probably
give us some
somewhere.
final thoughts, Tony?
Yeah, I think speed is of the essence for any changes. People are dying every day. So the faster we can cut through any kind of red tape to make a safe supply, absolutely. I think the shelters are starting to get on the right track as far as, trying to address issues. And yeah, speed, no red tape, I think everybody's unanimous on the safe supply thing.
Thank you. You know what, Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
it's incredible. And I'll tell you, the words that you've said are going to resonate with me for a long time.
Yeah,
there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think especially the one about, there are worse addictions than substance abuse. That one I think I will carry with me for a long time.
well,
Maybe quoting you on it.
Well,
you may hear it in the legislature.
Well, you don't get addicted to the heroin or cocaine. You get addicted to the good chemicals that are released in your brain.
Yeah,
There's a lot of things that can do that, not just
Yeah.
substances, right?
it's true. There's lots of good ways,
Yeah, lots of good ways, lots of bad ways.
chemicals released in our brains. Okay, the final thing that we'd like to do is take a screenshot. So if you are on the screen and you'd like to be part of the screenshot, please turn on your camera and put on your best smile. Or not, or adopt a pose, whatever you'd like to do. So Pranav, you're going to take the screenshot. Can you just give us a thumbs up when you're ready? And we'll go through the different screens.
All right, I see some people still opening their cameras.
Opening cameras. I don't know.
Okay,
Which one?
take a second for your hair. All right, and 3, 2, 1. Let me just check because there's a lot of people here.
Yeah.
So get everyone. And take one more. Got it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And to everybody who took part tonight, joined in the meeting, thank you so much for your concern. Thank you for being here and part of this conversation. We have a couple of different groups. The main one where we're discussing this issue is our homelessness work group. And so I'm hoping that you will sign up for our homelessness work group. Even if you can't make the meetings, then you can tune into, you'll receive the minutes, you'll know what we're talking about and what we're working on, because we absolutely need to deal with homelessness. We need to deal with this addiction epidemic, and we need to deal with gun violence. These are all three separate issues, but they also have interconnections that we need to deal with. And I see many people on the screen that I know who are doing wonderful work in the community. Shauna Harris from the Spadina Fort York Community Care, Curtis Priest from the Garment District Neighborhood Association, Javon, who is our Toronto Junior City Councillor, Tom Smarter, that I know you from Seeds of Hope. There's just so many people on this call that are doing, Gianca West from the West Queen West BIA, who are working working very hard on this issue. I'm obviously getting tired and running out of words, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your passion, and we will keep pushing on this issue, because this is an absolute crisis that is taking, in Canada, more lives than the pandemic, and we need to bring an end to this. And it is solvable. We have the solutions. We need to build the political will to actually implement and fund those solutions. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, call me, Tony, as soon as I'm
Yeah.
gonna call you right now.
Okay. Now